we're going to start with a piece of meat here. This is a piece of what's called an export rib. Export's a term referring to the type of trim the rib has. There are other types of trim on these ribs. There's something called a 109 rib people may have heard of. But this is an export rib. And what I'm going to do is turn it over to John, who's an experienced meat cutter who actually knows what he's doing and has been doing it for 30 years. And he's going to show you how you cut a rib steak off of the rib and a couple other things you can do with it. He's going to take it over to the saw. He's going to put it on. And he's going to move something called the guide into position. And that guide is going to determine the thickness. First, let's let everyone see what it looks like after it's been cut. If you notice, you still have to do some further trimming here because there's still a lot of fat on there, and you have to clean it off so it looks nice. So John is now going to show you how he trims. And what we're able to do at Mister Brisket, since we weigh these products before we trim them, what John's able to do is give you the type of trim you want to have versus when you purchase them in some markets and they leave a lot more of the fat on and around it because they're charging you what it weighs after it's trimmed. So believe it or not, you're better off with the way we do it from the standpoint of having the type of trim you want. Now all he does is he takes that beautiful piece of meat and he just cleans off the dust. Boom, it's ready to be taken. And then we can turn around and we can wrap it up. That a few times. We take the white paper, place it in, and we take one of these Mister Brisket stickers, and voila. Another thing, a lot of people like these steaks boneless, so John is going to show you how you can remove the bone from the rib. Takes a lot of skill to take that bone off. If you try and do that and you don't know what you're doing, A, you can cut yourself badly, or B, you're just going to leave much too much meat on the bone, and then you're going to have some very beefy beef ribs, which is nice. And by the way, these ribs are wonderful for barbecue. When people talk about beef ribs, this is what they talk about, the back of the prime rib, or the export rib, or whatever term you want to use. This is what you take when people talk about beef ribs, and this is what you throw on the grill. Now we have a piece of meat that's boneless, that's ideal for turning around and either doing as a roast or cutting. Just cut a couple steaks, John. Yeah, we call these Delmonico steaks. That's one term for them. A lot of people will refer to this as a boneless ribeye. And again, you'll notice how he's trimming that up. One thing I'd like to point out is that a true ribeye refers specifically to the eye of the meat right here. That's what a true ribeye really means, but that's not how the term is commonly used these days. You go to a restaurant, you order a ribeye, and it usually means this, a rib steak with a bone in. But a true ribeye is actually strictly the eye of the meat. That's all it's really supposed to be. Almost looks like a fillet. So this is just some of the things you can do with this cut of meat. This is arguably the most flavorful cut of meat that there is. Certainly a lot of people think so. And ultimately, that's your decision to make. The next piece of meat we're going to talk about here is a USDA Prime strip loin. And I guess what I want to say first of all is USDA Prime is a reference to the amount of marbling inside the meat. It's what we call interior marbling. And the finer it is, and the more of it there is, typically the more tenderful and flavorful. Tender and flavorful the meat is going to taste. Anyway, if you can take a good look at this, what you'll notice is there are a lot of finely flecked pieces of white within there, and although that's not going to make it low in calories, it's certainly going to make it taste good. And John's going to show you just, he's going to cut a couple of steaks off and show you how we trim them, and then we'll just say a couple other things about the strip loin. There you go. And once again, when you're buying these steaks from Mr. Brisket, we're weighing it as is before we trim it. At this point, we're able to give you the type of trim you want on the steak. We're not going to leave a lot of fat around it. What he's doing right now is trimming it in such a manner so that it's ready to go on the grill. This is the way you see it also when you go out to a nice restaurant. The strip loin has a lot of different names. In New York, it's commonly called a sirloin, and depending on how you choose to trim it, there's different nicknames for it. I've heard strips referred to as a New York strip or a Kansas City strip, and that has to do with how you trim. This is the way we typically do it, and I believe that's the New York strip style. We have some customers, not too many, but a few, that have us take all the fat off from around this completely, so it almost looks like a large fillet, and we call that Kobe style, which doesn't really make sense, but that's what we call it. And we ship quite a few of those out of state, as a matter of fact. The only other thing I wanted to say about this particular cut of meat is when you go to buy a T-bone steak or a porterhouse steak, this is half of it. Half of that is the short loin, is the strip. The other half is the beef tenderloin, which would run around here. And what you have is a bone in between. Now, what we typically buy at our store are boneless strip loins, but you can buy these with the bone in which case it's called a shell steak when you cut it, or you can buy it with the bone in there and the tenderloin attached, in which case then what you're dealing with is a porterhouse that you can then turn around and cut up into porterhouse and T-bone and shell steaks.